President for Research and Innovation at Central Michigan University, and I'd like to welcome you to today's research leadership discussion, which is one that I've entitled Polished Publications, a guide to writing, submitting, and revising professional manuscripts. Now, this is kind of a rebroadcast or representation of this research leadership discussion, which I gave to faculty about a year and a half ago. And today we're especially excited to engage with several graduate students that are on the line to listen in to this as well. So for those of you who might have heard this presentation before, if you do decide to log off, I won't be offended. But for those of you who do want to hear the information again, I'm glad to present it. So I've got a lot of information to share with you today, and it's all PowerPoint based. So I'm going to kind of go through this pretty quickly, but we'll certainly have time for questions at the end as well. I want to start by giving you just a little bit of history of my background editorial experience. I've served as the past editor of a journal called Soil Horizons, which is published by the Soil Science Society of America. And I currently serve on the editorial boards of both Pedosphere as well as Geoderma. These are both journals published by Elsevier. Personally, I've authored more than 200 peer-reviewed research manuscripts, and so I've had a lot of opportunity and experience to go through these types of documents and provide insight and editing and creation of the content as well. So, and as I'm giving my examples today, you're going to hear me talk a lot about soils. You should know that as an academic background, I am a soil scientist, and so I'll be using a lot of kind of soil examples to illustrate my points. Well, when you start to think about writing a professional manuscript, you need to know that writing is different in every discipline. And it's influenced by the readership, the techniques that we use, our professional terms. As an example of this, I would say that chemists might readily use acronyms like AA for atomic absorption or ICP for inductively coupled plasma. But to those writing in history, these terms would be elusive. They wouldn't mean anything. So it's really important for us to know who our audience is and who it will be as we continue to develop a manuscript. The next thing you need to know is, know what you want to write. How much data do you have? Have you performed a solid literature review? Should your data be split into 2 or even 3 manuscripts to keep the foci succinct? Sometimes if you're too broad or far-reaching in a single manuscript, it can be troublesome. So the idea is to try to tighten it and focus it on a specific question to be answered. Next, you need to know something about the scope of the project. What type of journal is appropriate to your study? Is it a local study, a regional study, a national or international study? Now, when we talk about the indexing of a journal, this gives us some idea of how broadly that particular journal is read. And the Science Citation Index is one of the premier indexes out there. There are others as well, but this is one of the ones that a lot of scientists will point to as one of the premier indexes. So one of the examples that I commonly give with this is, if I went out and I collected 10 soil samples outside of Faust Hall here in Mount Pleasant, do you think I could go and publish that study in an international journal? Probably not, because my scope just isn't large enough to represent that. Would I be able to publish that information in a local journal, maybe a Michigan journal? Perhaps, depending on the novelty of the subject matter. Now, when we think about which journals constitute the best journals in a field of study, I mentioned the Science Citation Index. There are, probably 4 dozen or maybe even 5 dozen different soil science journals, but you'll note that the list that's here on the screen in front of you, these are the only journals that are represented in the Science Citation Index. So it's a very select group of journals. And I would always encourage you to go to the best journal that you possibly can in terms of the information that you're trying to convey and the readership that you are trying to reach. When you're trying to think about where you can find information on these citation indexes and databases, you can go out to the CMU Library's website, and there's a bunch of databases that are found there. There's an entire list, and they're listed alphabetically, and you can click on the letters at the top of the screen to quickly index those. But some of the ones that I use more commonly are Scopus and Google Scholar and Science Direct. There's PubMed, Academic Search Complete, Agricola. There's just a bunch of them out there. So you'll start finding which ones make the most sense for your research and where it points you to the types of articles that you're interested in. Now, one of the things that we talk about with regard to journals is the journal impact factor. And this is really the measure of the average number of citations to articles, published in scholarly journals. And we often use this as a proxy for the relative importance of a journal within its field of study. Journals with higher impact factors are deemed more important than those with lower impact factors. And the peer review aspect of journal publications brings an extra layer of legitimacy as the work has been vetted by experts in the field of study. One of the real advantages that I always pointed out to my own personal graduate students is if they were able to publish a paper before they went to their thesis defense or their dissertation defense is, I would tell them, you should go in extra confident because that work has already been vetted by some of the best scientists in the world. So it's not like you're going to go into your defense and have your faculty members on your committee cut you apart. You've already had really solid scientists review the work and make sure that it's looking good. Now, when we talk about impact factor, there's another consideration that we have to think about, and this is journal quartile. If you take all of the journals in any given field of study, so let's just again use soil science, all of the soil science journals, and we say out of that, let's just use round numbers, out of that 80 journals, which are in the top quartile, the top 25%? Well, it would be the top 20 out of the 80 listed in that field of study. Now, there's a website that you can go out to called Simago Journal Rank. And if you just Google that, you'll come to it immediately. And all you do at Simago Journal Rank is type in the name of your journal, and it's going to pop up with some information about that journal. And I like this little visual graphic that they provide because it's very easy to see how the journal has ranked and progressed over the years. Now, I mentioned the fact that I'm on the editorial board of Petosphere. Years ago, when that journal was first launched back in the early 90s, it was a Q4 journal. Not many people published in it. But then as time went by and more people started publishing there were more references to articles in that journal. You'll note that by 2000, it became a quartile 3 journal. Then by 2006, a quartile 2 journal. And in 2018, it became a quartile 1 journal. And that's because more and more people were publishing in the journal and also citing works from the journal. This just again shows you some of the trajectory of Petosphere over the years. Again, starting out with citations per document very low in the right-hand side there, and then moving up dramatically to more than 5 citations per document by 2017 or thereafter. So again, more information that you can find out on Simago. For any faculty that we might have on the line as well, you can also find journal quartile listed in our SciVal Research Analytics platform. So if you click on the tab that says Published, and then you look by journal quartile, you can then find all of the publications that you have over a specified number of years, and here I've selected over the last 5 or 6 years, and see which quartile of journals those were published in. So I just used myself as an example on this, and you'll notice that since 2017, 97.1% of my journal articles have been in quartile 1 or quartile 2 journal publications. Okay, so let's go back to this idea of local or regional journals versus national or international journals. So a local or regional journal is best suited for applied research, demonstrations of established approaches, studies unique to small...
You'll go somewhere.
Sorry, did you have a question? I hear somebody talking in the background. If you could please mute, that would be great. Okay. That'd be great. We'll have a chance for questions at the end. These local or regional journals generally undergo a less rigorous peer review. They're still good journals, but they just have a smaller geographic area that they are typically looking at. Now, national and international journals, by comparison, are best suited for large-scale studies, new and innovative approaches, studies with broad applicability, and they typically undergo a strong peer review. Now remember, even if your research project is small or applied research, a well-written manuscript can and should still be published. And that's really important when we think about getting out new work and new ideas and novelty, right? You simply need to find the appropriate journal. That's the critical part that you need to be thinking about. So if you're having trouble identifying where you might find an appropriate journal, you can use Elsevier's Journal Finder. And I put the link down there at the lower right-hand corner of this slide. At Journal Finder, you can go out to this website and type in your paper title, drop in your abstract, maybe put in a few key words, and it will help you identify suitable journals for publishing that work in. It also provides information on the impact factor of that journal, the review speed, and the acceptance rate relative to each of the journals that may be selected by Journal Finder. So other presses may have a similar tool, but this is one that I commonly use for Elsevier journals. Now let's talk about manuscript preparation. Okay, once you've decided on a specific journal for publication, you need to obtain several articles from that journal. Carefully look through those articles and research things like the word limit, the number of figure tables that are permitted, and special requirements relative to format or even publication costs, which could include open access costs. See if your journal has a specific style manual to be used. So my professional society, the Soil Science Society of America, has an extensive style manual available online, which you can go and download and then look at all of the different information in there that will help you format your document properly. Now, absent a full style manual, authors should carefully, precisely follow the instructions to authors and articles that are printed in the given journal. Remember that these articles that are printed in the journal, they've already been accepted and printed. So of course, if you emulate that style, how they're laid out, graphically on the page, those sorts of things, you'll have a good sense for how that content should be organized in your own document. And I cannot stress to you enough, details, details, details. Having been an editor and reviewed, probably hundreds of papers over the course of my career, I can tell you that if an author submits a paper to a journal and they haven't taken the time to adhere to the style requirements of the journal, I find it very hard to take that content seriously. I really want to know that the author themselves has committed enough time and effort to do the very best job they can in rolling that manuscript forward for consideration by our journal. Now we're going to talk about the layout of the actual manuscript. First comes the title, the authorship, and then there's 5 key sections of the paper. Now the title should be descriptive, but generally less than 12 words. We don't want a whole paragraph, so keep things brief. The authorship with institutional affiliation will come next. And then there are typically 5 key sections to a paper: the abstract, the introduction and literature review, materials and methods, results and discussion, and conclusions. And I'm going to go through each of these independently and talk about each of them in depth. So with regard to authorship, only those people who have substantively contributed to the paper should be listed as authors. If there are other people who have helped out a little bit, and you'd like to acknowledge them, there is an acknowledgement section of the paper, but they should not be listed as a full co-author. Now, the corresponding author is a special type of author. This is the one who actually makes the submission to the journal and corresponds with the journal throughout the entire review process. Typically, we want the corresponding author to be a stable point of contact for the research moving forward. Somebody who's going to be in that position with that email address for a number of years. And also be sure to use your professional email address. We don't want to have something like basketballfan23@yahoo.com, right? Make sure it is your CMISH email or some professional email address that you list. Now, a major professor is commonly listed as a second or corresponding author, and in some disciplines, they might also be listed as the last author to indicate the leader of the research group or laboratory. This varies field by field, but you'll get a sense of that as you talk with people in your particular field of study. Now, the abstract is a section of the document which is a complete summarization of the full manuscript. It briefly covers the objectives, the hypotheses, the methods, results, and conclusions. It's constructed as a single paragraph. Typically, it's around 250 words or less. Some journals actually limit it to 200 words or less. So again, this is something you need to carefully review. You need to define all terms. And curiously, although the abstract comes first, it is the last section of the paper that you want to write, because you have to have everything else in the paper organized and completed in order to then write a summary of that as the abstract. Remember that the abstract is your chance to hook the readers. This is a short thing for them to read, only 250 words or so, and it may be the only part of your paper that they initially read. They're going to glance through it and say, yes, this looks good, or no, this isn't what I thought it was. I'm going to go on to the next paper. So next comes the introduction and literature review. And here we ask questions like, what is this paper about? Is there a problem that needs to be solved or better studied or studied in a new way? And what 3 or 4 very relevant studies have attempted to solve that problem previously? How did those studies help? What were their methods? What were their results or their conclusions? How did they fall short or how could they have gone further? How could you design a better study today based on those failings or advances in technology or methods since those previous studies were completed? What is your hypothesis? And briefly, how do you intend to test it? Now, I told a graduate student of mine a story years ago, and she really liked this, so I thought I would include it, right? There's a certain pattern that you follow in a lot of introduction and literature review sections, right? And if you follow this pattern, I think it will help you understand the flow of that section. And it goes something like this. Life is good. There's some opening optimism, but it rains. There's a problem. Recent research has proven that umbrellas can keep people dry in the rain. Here's some context. However, uncertainty exists as to the effectiveness of red umbrellas in keeping people dry in the rain. This is an unknown. Thus, the objectives of this research are to test the effectiveness of red umbrellas on keeping people dry in the rain. This is the purpose. And then we end the introduction with the hypothesis. We hypothesize that, da 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 da. Okay? Now, there are some really important techniques that I want you to utilize in constructing your introduction and literature review. First of all, you need to find a good reference paper on the subject matter and go back to their original references and resources. The way that I've termed this with my group is it's the golden paper, right? It will give you all kinds of other papers that you can study, and they're all listed right there. So you don't have to go out and try to find them somewhere. They're all listed, and you can go back to those original sources. The next thing would be to identify authorities in a particular field of study and search all the publications by that author. If you're wanting to know something about visible near infrared spectroscopy in soils, you need to know that Christine Morgan and Alex McBrackney are worldwide authorities in that field of study. And if that is something that you're working on, you want to go in and look at all of the work that those authors have completed. Then also consider the scope of the paper you are writing. If you're writing an article for a global audience, consider references from all over the world. And again, I'll use soils as an example. If I'm writing a paper on soils of the world and I don't cite any papers from Africa or South America, I'm missing out on a big part of the world. So I need to make sure that I have references and sources from all of those places listed. And also be sure you are referencing some articles from the journal to which you are submitting. If you're submitting to Geoderma and you don't have any Geoderma papers submitted, that can look a bit odd to the editor. Now, print sources from peer-reviewed journals and books are generally preferred, and you need to realize that the newest techniques in science are likely to be found in journals, not in books, okay? I encourage you to avoid excessive web citation and to be highly cautious of non-reviewed materials, blogs, conference abstracts, Wikipedia, those types of things. Those are not peer-reviewed, okay? Those are conjecture and people's opinions. Government data and official sites are generally permissible. If you want to go out to the National Weather Service or NOAA or NASA and cite some data that's listed on one of their websites, that is generally okay. Well, next we'll move on to the materials and methods, and this describes the setting of the study. List only the methods that you intend to use to test your hypothesis. If there are several methods that may be used, but you didn't, don't include them or don't mention them. If there are some methods proven by others to be incorrect, don't use those. Identify only the statistical methods you will use to accept or reject your hypothesis based upon the literature review. Don't include any introductory materials or results in the materials and methods section. The materials and methods should provide a brief summary of the methods used. You want to use modern methods. And I will tell you, I was just reviewing a paper earlier this week, and there were a couple of citations that were listed there from the 1940s and 50s. And of course, those are the classical methods that this particular author was citing. And what I encourage them to do is, it's fine to list the classical methods, but you should also list a more modern update or interpretation of the classical method. So the 1948 method, and by the way, the new adaptation or version of that was given in 1984 or 2016, okay? Provide the manufacturer and model of all equipment. Be brief. General occurrence and features, field methods, laboratory methods, statistical methods. Have some general headings like that. Remember, if readers want more information on your specific methods, they can consult your references. But you need to provide enough detail for an experiment to be repeated by a different analyst. The next comes the results and discussion. And in some journals, results are separated from discussion as separate sections. It really just depends on the style of that particular journal. Do not include any introductory material or methods in the results and discussion section. List the results that you found in your study and discuss them as they help you accept or reject your hypothesis. Compare your results to the previous studies and say why they are the same or why are they different. If you discovered flaws in your methods or models, mention those and discuss those. It's really important because you don't want the next analyst to come along and have the same pitfall that you may have had. Present pertinent facts, summarize important data in tables, emphasize the uniqueness of your findings, that is, how are they different from what has previously been found, and explain your data. Why did your study produce the results that it did? You know this information better than anyone else. You have context. You were in the field. You were in the laboratory. You observed things. You have a sense of things that people just reading the paper are not going to know anything about unless you put that down in prose. And then we get to conclusions. Do not repeat any detailed methods or results here. Summarize your results, stating whether you accepted or rejected your hypothesis. Say why your study is important and what it adds to the literature, the science, and suggest the next step that could be taken to follow your study based on your results or a limitation of your study. For example, future work should focus on XYZ, or 3 summers or 3 years of data would have been helpful to fully test the treatment differences, right? So this gives the next analyst an idea of what the next step should be in this particular line of study. And you all know how science works. I mean, anytime you investigate something, you answer a question or two, but you have 10 or 20 new questions that come up as a result of what you found. So that's how science is continually evolving. Your conclusion should briefly recap the major findings of your work. No new citations should be given. You can provide citations in the conclusions, that's okay. Just no new citations that haven't been previously cited elsewhere in the document. No new information should be presented other than stuff that you've already presented previously in the document. And this is your chance to highlight the most important achievements of your work. Now, let me say a word or two about writing style, okay? Every author has his or her own style of writing. Good editors will allow some leeway for individual style so long as, 1, it does not violate the rules of grammar and usage, and 2, it doesn't detract from the meaning of the statement. So a way that I will give you an example of this is I had a graduate student come to me one time. It was an international student. And the student came in the morning and said, Dr. Weindorf, good morning, but I'm feeling sluggish today. And I was like, oh, I'm feeling sluggish. I wouldn't phrase something that way. I would say I'm tired, right? But if I think about that, did it convey how that person was feeling? Yes, it did, right? Did it violate any rules of usage or grammar? No, it did not. And it didn't detract from the meaning of the statement. So as an editor, if I was seeing a statement like that, I should let that go. That's okay. I shouldn't, as an editor, necessarily strike through that and say, I'm going to just write it as, I feel tired today, because then I'm putting my influence in on the paper. And so I'm getting off on a sidebar here just about editorial comments, right? But I try to allow authors to express themselves as they feel free to do so, right? And I try not to be overly corrective of that. One thing that I want to encourage you to do is don't stop writing when you're quote unquote in the flow. Get it out, get it down on paper. You're working on something, you're looking at some data, and you're like, oh my gosh, what if it was this, and da 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 da, and I need to include that, I need to cite this paper, and da da da. When you're in the flow and you're just having all of those thoughts come to your mind, get them down on the computer as quickly as possible. They don't have to be perfect. They can be bulleted, it can be incomplete sentences, whatever. It doesn't matter. Just get it all down on paper. You can always come back to it and fix it later on. And I'll show you an example of that later on. Now, with regard to writing style and technical writing, brevity is key. We always want to use the shorter way to say something, right? Not be verbose and use lots of words. We want to avoid cliches. You need to use powerful words that convey depth and context. Instead of saying, on the other hand, use the word conversely or contrariwise. Instead of the soil's makeup, you mean the soil's composition. Instead of the term show that there are, use the term reveal. Instead of human influenced, one word, anthropogenic. Instead of two words, over time, use temporal. Instead of other side of the coin, use alternately. Instead of because of this, use consequently. And I give you a little example here on the right-hand side. Previous studies showed that runoff coefficients would reduce along with the increasing vegetation coverage fraction. So saith Wang et al., 2011. That's 19 words. But I can convey that same sentiment in 11 words by saying Wang et al., 2011, showed decreasing runoff coefficients with increasing vegetation. So oftentimes when I finish writing a paper, my co-authors and I tighten it. That's the word we use. We tighten it. We try to compress it and cut out any unnecessary words to make it as powerful and as contextual as possible. No one sentence paragraphs. A paragraph is a minimum of 2 sentences, okay? You need to avoid excessively long sentences that are 15 lines long. That is a run-on sentence, right? You need to vary your sentence structure. Use proper grammar. I got a kick out of these 2 little things I found online. I like cooking my family and my pets. It says use commas. Don't be a psycho. I like cooking, comma, my family, comma, and my pets, right? So you get the idea behind this, right? Use proper grammar. Use proper grammar. Avoid using the same word in a sentence more than one time. The approximate number of samples was approximately. No, we don't want to do that. Vary the sentence structure, vary the word structure as well. Direct quotations of over 3 written lines should be block indented on both sides. Use a comma before the word and. Sand, comma, silt, comma, and clay. No informal language, so avoid using terms like handy or crafty. And we don't use contractions in technical writing. Instead of can't, we write out cannot. Instead of didn't, it's did not. Instead of it's it is, right? Terms which will be repeatedly used in a paper should be stated, followed by an acronym. So soil organic carbon, we're going to state that and then just refer to it as SOC after that, or time domain reflectometry is TDR. Note that these do not necessarily need to be capitalized. We only capitalize them if they refer to a proper noun. And traditionally, acronyms are not used to begin a sentence. The terms are once again spelled out, but I will tell you I've seen this softening a little bit over the years, and in more journal articles, it's now permissible to start a sentence with an acronym. Chemical abbreviations do not need to be defined. They are considered common knowledge. So you don't need to define calcium and then put Ca in parentheses. You can just use Ca. Be mindful of significant digits. If you're working with statistical software or Excel or something like that, you might be using formulas that can generate excessive digits which are not necessarily significant. And a great way that I think about this is with regard to GPS points. Sometimes it's 98.21685342187. And there's no way that GPS is accurate to that resolution. So be cognizant of those types of things. Now, with regard to numbers, most numbers less than 10 are spelled out. Numbers above 10 are typically numerical. And the exceptions to this rule of thumb are figure numbers, site numbers, and data numbers. So I give you a little example here. Site 5 showed a 22% increase in erosion over the 8-year study, and you see that in figure 6. So that gives you an idea of when you use it, the spelled out version versus the actual numerical symbol. Now, figure and table captions should contain sufficient information that they make perfect sense to a layperson if removed from the document. So this means you always need to provide locational context. You need to provide appropriate citations to references. You need to once again define all acronyms. Tables normally have headers. Figures normally have footers, meaning they come below the figure. You need to follow the precise format used for tables. No Excel spreadsheets or blocks. We use spanners in technical writing. So, what I often refer to this as is kind of the straight face test, right? If you were to pull a figure or a table out of your manuscript and hand it to someone out in the hall and let them try to interpret what that means, would they be able to understand everything you're presenting to them from that one page and what you have in the figure caption or the table header, right? If they do and they understand all of it, perfect. You have enough documentation there. If not, you need to give it a little bit more context. So here's just a couple of examples. Table 4, predictive model statistics for spatial variability analysis of surface soil, 0 to 2 centimeters, elemental concentration in Copcia-Mica, Romania. And then a figure over there to the right-hand side, photographs of sampled pedons in Texas, Italy, Hungary. Field suspected lithologic discontinuities are marked with a dot, and the depth measurement on the tape measures are in centimeters. So that really gives you all of the information to know where you're at, what you're looking at, and what that information is presented to you. Now, you need to consult your specific journal to understand whether or not these tables and figures should occur within the text or at the end of the document or be saved as a different file completely. Many of the journals that I submit to, they're saved as separate files. I might have one file that has all of the tables, but then I have each figure as a separate file that I would save into a folder. Journals have specific file type and resolution requirements. Be sure you review those. And for tables, also be sure you use proper footnoting. And consistency is key in your writing style. You need to pick one way of doing something and stay consistent throughout the entire document. Think about headings and abbreviations. So here I list Nanjing, China, and then Beijing, China. And in the instance of Nanjing, I have China in all capital letters. So I wouldn't want to do it that way, and then later on in the document have China listed with just the C capitalized. The idea would be pick one way and do it the same way throughout the entire document. Consistency is key throughout the entire document. Don't end sentences in a 2-letter word like it or by. Reword the sentence so that it doesn't end that way. And don't use any first-person pronouns. We, our, my, nothing like that. The one exception to this is right at the end of the introduction section, after you list your objectives, you have a hypothesis, and you can state, we hypothesize that, and then provide the hypothesis. Now, you've heard me talk about citations and references. What I mean by that is a citation is the mention of the facts or figures within the text of a manuscript, providing attribution to others. And we want to avoid excessively citing one paper over and over and over. I had a student in class one time cite the same paper 56 times. I counted, and it was like, nope, you need to find some other sources. Then the references occur as a separate section following the conclusions to provide additional information on the citation. The citations and the references must have perfect fidelity. That is, they must match exactly. You never want to have an extra citation without a reference, or an extra reference without being cited in the paper. So make sure that those match exactly, specifically with regard to year, the author names, the spellings, those types of things. Now, sometimes students will ask me, when do I need to cite something? So these are the questions that I ask them. Is the information you are presenting common knowledge? If it's yes, then you don't need to cite it. But if it's not common knowledge, you need to cite it. The second question is the information you are presenting from someone else? If it's from someone else, you always provide a citation. And if you're not quite sure on one of these two questions, provide the citation. It is much better to err on the side of caution and provide more citations and references than not enough. So here's an example. The Mississippi River is the largest river system in the United States. That's common knowledge. No citation is needed for that. Or the Mississippi River transports 145 million metric tons of sediment annually. I need to cite that. Someone measured that. And whoever measured that, I need to reference that and cite that and provide attribution to that author. The citation examples that you will see, if it's a single author, it might be listed as Weindorf, 2007. Two authors might be listed as Zhu and Weindorf, 2009. And if it's three or more authors, you'll see et al. Listed. Somenahali et al., 2009. And then these are the references that would go with those citations. So, one listed at the top is single author. The second one listed is two authors. And then the one at the bottom has three or more authors. Okay. Now realize that there's a different style for each type of document and for different publishers. So print articles and journals will have a slightly different style for the reference than a book or a web source or software or published abstracts or a thesis or dissertation, right? And then the style of how I need those references to look will look different in the Soil Science Society of America than it will in an Elsevier journal. So you have to adjust all those, and it does take a lot of time. But I'm telling you, it's really important that you commit to getting these right. Please include the digital object identifier, or DOI, if possible. If you don't have it, it's not the end of the world. It's not compulsory. But if you do have it, providing it is often handy and helpful. And then again, consult the style manual or printed articles within the journal to which you plan to submit for guidance, because they have all met those criteria. So in Microsoft Word, my suggestions to you are: do set tabs for alignment, use the spelling and grammar check, double space your document when you're getting ready to submit it for review. Do include line numbers in your review, include page numbers, use track changes for revisions. But my own personal advice is do not use the automatic reference and citation feature. Why is that? It's too easy for that material to be imported and then have that style not match up with the requirements of the journal. So every reference in every paper that I publish, I type it in personally myself. Do not use excessive spaces to align information. Once they try to format that at the journal, things can get spread all over the document in different places. And again, don't use excessive text boxes, same sort of thing. When they take that out of a Word format and start converting it over into the journal format, those text boxes can fly everywhere. So now you're getting ready to submit to the journal. Now, prior to external review, obtain some internal reviews from peers within your organization. Have all the errors been corrected? Is the entire document perfectly consistent? Does your manuscript meet the style requirements of the journal precisely? Do you have all data secured, backed up, and accessible if requested? Then we're finally ready to submit. Now, there are two main types of submission that I've seen in my career. Some of those go through websites, some of those are email submissions. Now, an online website submission system requires you to create a registration profile and enter various information, your affiliation, address, phone number, email. They're going to ask you for potential reviewers. So you want to have this information ready. Sometimes journals will say that potential reviewers that you suggest have to come from countries outside of that represented by the authors on the paper. So be ready for that. If all your authors are from the United States, you need to be able to list some potential reviewers from outside the United States. Then there's typically an upload queue for you to attach your manuscript file, your figures or tables, your cover letter, those types of documents, and you can attach each of those. But then some journals may also ask you to make an email submission, and this is directly to an associate editor. This is more common in smaller journals. Sometimes these are regionally assigned or assigned by a given area of expertise. And here you'll just be corresponding by email directly with the associate editor. Typically, the associate editor's email addresses are given in the journal or on its website. Now, one thing I want to remind you of is simultaneous submission to multiple journals at the same time is prohibited. That is just something we do not do. You submit to a journal and then you wait, and you have to wait for one journal to render a decision until you potentially consider submitting it to another journal if they decide to decline your submission. But you cannot take your paper and submit it to 3 or 4 or even 2 different journals at the same time. That is not something that is done. Many journals now use plagiarism detection software to scan all incoming articles. And Authenticate is a platform that we use here at Central Michigan University in that capacity. The Authenticate score should reveal a similarity index of less than 15%. And I want to be clear with you here, no instance of plagiarized work is acceptable. The similarity revealed in this similarity index that is considered acceptable oft comes from the materials and methods that are common amongst many papers or authors. So I'll give you an example of this. As a soil scientist, I commonly run a particle size analysis to determine the sand, silt, and clay content. And in my materials and methods section, I've published that exact same process or method hundreds of times. So there's only so many ways that I can say sand, silt, and clay determinations through particle size analysis were made per G and Botter 1986. I mean, I can't repackage that hundreds of different ways. So when we talk about the similarity, that's where some of it comes from, right? Papers, finally, should not use artificial intelligence for content generation. You've heard a lot in the news recently about ChatGPT. We do not want to be using that content. Your content needs to be yours, something that you have intellectually contributed to the document. Now, many journals use something called double-blind review. That is, authors do not know who the reviewers are. Reviewers do not know who the authors are. Only the editor or associate editor know who both the author and reviewer are. Double-blind review promotes but does not guarantee anonymity. It encourages candor in review. It attempts to avoid favoritism. It can be less personal, and it can also be brutally honest. Now, when you submit a paper for peer review, this process normally takes between a month to even 3 months or more from the date of submission. So my advice to you is to start early. For peer reviews in highly rated journals, they'll typically send this out for 3 reviews of peer reviewers. And for smaller journals, it might be 1 or 2 reviewers, or an associate editor might also serve as one of the reviewers. And following the reviews, the editor or associate editor decide the disposition of the manuscript. I can't emphasize that enough. The reviewers will make a recommendation as to whether or not the paper should be accepted or rejected. But that is a recommendation only. The editor or associate editor are the ones that decide ultimately whether or not your paper is accepted or rejected. And this is how it might come back. It might come back as accepted. They might request minor revisions. They might request major revisions. And if they request major revisions, your paper is likely to be reviewed again by the same set of peer reviewers. It could be rejected, or it could come back with a different kind of determination that the paper is not appropriate to the journal scope. Okay, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Now, you see that line that I put across the screen here. Anything above that line is really good news. Okay, even if they request major revisions, that's really good news, because what they are providing you is a blueprint of how to get the paper accepted. They're going to tell you all of the questions or the things they need you to address. And so long as you do that, there's a good chance that your paper is going to be accepted. I'm not going to say it's 100%, but it's a pretty good chance, okay? So when you get those reviews back, you need to carefully read all reviewer comments and decide on how to proceed. You can make the requested changes, or you can decide to forego the requested changes by providing additional justification. Not all reviewers will agree. And as an example of this, I'll tell you, reviewer 1 might say something like, I really enjoyed figure 5 in the manuscript. That really helped me to understand the concept of the paper. And then reviewer 2 might say, I didn't like figure 5 at all. I want it deleted. So sometimes you can play off one reviewer against another, and you're not going to be able to please both of them. So you're going to have to make a decision. We're going to keep figure 5 because I find it valuable, and reviewer number 1 also found it very valuable as well. And again, the editor makes the final decision on paper acceptance, not the reviewers. You want to make all your revisions with Microsoft Word track changes turned on for easy referencing among authors. Prepare a separate document entitled Responses to Reviewer Comments. And that document should contain a cover page to the editor summarizing what revisions were completed. Then you list all the comments followed by the revisions. And my own personal style is I put all of these in blue text for easy identification. And then every edit that I make in the paper, I do in blue font, just so they can easily see very cleanly on the page what has been changed in the document. With track changes turned on, it does track all the changes, but if there are a lot of changes, it gets really convoluted and really messy. So that colored text is a really nice way to indicate the changes and do it in a very elegant, seamless way. I would encourage you to complete your revisions and resubmission quickly, within 2 weeks typically. And the editor or associate editor may return revisions to the peer reviewers or may simply determine if the reviewer comments have been adequately addressed. Sometimes multiple rounds of review are required for acceptance. Then once you finally get the paper accepted, you're going to receive notification of acceptance by email. Your manuscript is going to be placed in queue for printing, and those printing times vary widely. Sometimes it's only a week or two, and sometimes it can be 6 months or more. Just be patient. As the printing time nears, the copy editor is going to send you a galley proof for your approval. And this is a typeset version of exactly how it's going to look on the page in the journal. You need to carefully review that galley proof and then mark any final corrections to return to the journal. At this stage, you are not permitted to make any content revisions. Only minor typesetting or typographical error corrections can be made. You need to make sure you've paid all applicable costs for the publication, color photos, figures, open access costs. These things can be costly. For authors with common names, Jane Smith, let's say, consider assigning your ORC ID to the paper to uniquely identify it as your work. The ORC ID provides a persistent digital identifier that distinguishes you from every other researcher and supports automated linkages between you and your professional activities, ensuring that your work is recognized. For more information, just go out and Google ORC ID and you'll come to their website and can complete a profile. Some journals only provide content to subscribers, so that is non-subscribers can only view the abstract. So the authors can elect to pay to have the journal freely available to everyone by paying an open access fee. This is costly, often on the order of $3,000 or more. It does improve exposure, but again, it's costly. Without open access, readers can pay for the articles individually or go to a interlibrary loan, for instance, to request those articles. And then finally, congratulations, your paper has been published. This is just a fantastic moment. When you get that paper out in print, it's time to go have the beverage of your choice and enjoy your favorite meal. And you just feel like you're on top of the world. And it lasts for about 24 hours. And then you're on to the next paper and you're starting to work on that the next day. And that is the life of an academician. All right. Now, you've worked hard to get this paper published, so you need to tell people about it. I encourage you to post links, not the full paper, to your social media. I encourage you to send links to the article to your professional colleagues. You can announce your new publication in newsletters or, get the word out in other venues such as that. Do not put a full copy of the paper on ResearchGate for others to download. Remember that the publisher retains the copyright unless you published your paper open access. Now, it is generally permissible to send a full copy of the paper to colleagues here at the university, other graduate students, or close associates. When I would get a copy of a soil science paper printed, I would send it to my other soil science colleagues in my department just to let them know what my most recent publication was. Those types of things are permissible. Now, what about the papers that were rejected? What you need to ask yourself is, why was the article rejected? Was it poor design? Were there insufficient replications? Maybe I wanted to write a paper called The Soils of the World. And again, I went outside my office and I collected 10 samples. I just didn't have enough replications of my thought in order to get it published in that international journal. Did I not have enough data to support my conclusions? Was there a faulty analysis? Was it poor writing or article construction? Some of these can be overcome with additional time or revision. Okay. Oh, one other thing I wanted to mention here, the idea that the publication was not appropriate to the journal's scope. And what I mean by that is, let's say that I wrote a paper on a really new novel approach in soil science, and I submitted it to the Journal of Animal Science. Well, the Journal of Animal Science is going to look at that and they're going to say, this looks like a really good paper, but we're an animal science journal. We don't know anything about soil. This is not a decision on the quality of your work, but I'm going to have to reject it. But I suggest you go over to Petosphere and submit it there. So sometimes you submit it to a journal and it's just not within the appropriate scope of their journal. Okay. Now, a couple of things I want to wrap up with. When we talk about publication productivity as an academician, one of the metrics that we look at is the H index. And Jorge E. Hirsch suggested this as a measure of both the productivity and impact of the published work of a scientist or scholar. And it's based upon the scientist's most cited papers and the number of citations that they have received in other publications. Hirsch estimates that after 20 years, a successful scientist will have an H index of 20, an outstanding scientist an H index of 40, and a truly unique individual an H index of 60. And of course, H values are going to vary between different fields. There are three key indices that I look at when I look at my own personal H indices: Google Scholar, Web of Science, and Scopus. And you'll notice that my H index number is not the same at each of those. It varies based on which types of publications and the number of publications of mine that are captured in each of those databases. There's also an M statistic, and you might find this referenced in the journal Scientometrics. And this standardizes citations by the age of the researcher and allows for comparison of researchers at different career stages. Now, some platforms offer versioning control to only let you see your productivity statistics, but I would ask you to consider making your profile public to allow others to more easily find you, your work, and compare their performance to yours over time. So let me show you a couple of mine. I'll just show you my statistics as an example of this in Web of Science. Since 2006, per Web of Science, I have 173 publications. Now, you might be thinking back to when I just opened my presentation and I said, well, I have more than 200 published papers, and I do. But not all 200 of those published papers are captured within the Web of Science database, which is why there are only 173 listed here. According to Web of Science, you see I have an H index on the right of 38, and that my work has been cited 4,281 times. Okay, so that gives you an idea of my productivity over my career of the last 20 years or so. Compare that with my profile in Scopus. Scopus I have an H index of 40, and I have 4,735 citations of 190 documents. So this is getting closer to the 200. Scopus captured a few more papers than Web of Science did, right? So it gives me another idea of where I stand. And then finally, you might look at Google Scholar. And here I have an H index of 48. They are also tracking my number of citations of my work. And you can look at those. My top cited paper there in 2004 was cited by 369 different authors, right? Or 369 different papers, rather. So it gives you an idea of how you can track your productivity in terms of a scientist with these different publication metrics and statistics. Finally, there's a little summary sheet here from Elsevier that I just threw up here on the screen, how to get published. And we've talked a lot about this: a good manuscript and scope. Here's the publication ethics, follows the guidelines for authors, looks at illustrations, uses proper manuscript language, talks about the submission process, making sure you're equipped to properly get the paper submitted. So look for these types of tips out there. And if you're truly interested and want a copy of this, I'm sure I can point you in the right direction. So as we wrap up here, we've got just a few minutes left. I'm going to give you a sample paragraph, okay? And here's how it reads. You can bet the nitrogen in plot A will be sufficient. Similar results were observed in a study in Louisiana, USA. So saith Weindorf et al., 2009. Zhu et al., 2010, examined 200 samples at these coordinates and found. Boy, this is a lot of problems, okay? So normally when I'm giving this presentation in front of a group of people, I'll kind of ask for some raised hands and can you see all the problems here? Well, I'll just highlight them for you, right? You can bet. I mean, that's a colloquialism, right? I mean, that's informal language like handy or crafty. So we don't want to have that. Nitrogen, the word is spelled out. I could have used the chemical symbol N to abbreviate that, right? Notice that I have Weindorf et al., and I have no period or comma after that. But then Zhu et al. Down below, I have et al. Italicized and a period after that. That's inconsistency, all right? Then I have a bunch of significant digits related to my GPS coordinates. And finally, I examined 200 samples at these coordinates and found that's an incomplete sentence, okay? So there's all kinds of problems that are listed there. All right. So I'm going to wrap up there and let me stop sharing my screen for a second and see if I can just go back to where you can see me. And I'd be glad to take any questions that you may have if we hear a raised hand or somebody has a question wants to jump on. Questions? It's awfully quiet. Somebody be bold.
Yes, Professor Windroff.
Yes,
Yeah.
hi.
Hi. Yeah. Thank you for the insightful presentation. Um, I was just willing to know about your impressions regarding the journals that charge a publication fee versus those that don't charge that kind of fee.
Yep.
What's the factor that makes this difference, and how is that viewed? Like, are the ones that charge are less prestigious than the others that do not charge?
That's a great question. What I would tell you is over the course of my career, I'm just ballparking it here, but I'm going to say probably 85% of the papers that I've published, I have published free of charge, meaning they're subscription based, not open access. Okay. Um, for the 15% that I've published that have been open access, I typically reserve those for highly novel approaches, something that is brand new that I really need to get out there and make a big splash because there's not a lot of previous work in that area and get a lot of people from different parts of the world seeing that, right? Um, that said, realize that academics at many universities they have access to all of these kinds of databases through their library anyway. So if I'm at Texas Tech or LSU or Alabama or Florida or any other university out there, Ball State, it doesn't matter. They're all going to have libraries where you can access these journals free of charge. Okay. What we're talking about through open access is allowing people who are not associated or not affiliated with universities or have university libraries to access this content. This might be somebody in the general public. It might be somebody from the media. It might be somebody, that is at a private company. They may not have access to those types of resources. They could request it through interlibrary loan if they wanted, or, seek it out at a library. It just takes a little bit more time, right? So I guess in response to your question, I would simply say is think about this with your co-authors. And I will tell you, just because you don't have to pay to get an article published, that does not mean that the journal is a bad journal. Okay. There are a lot of journals out there that offer a subscription-based model. Some of them, for instance, will have you pay based upon the number of pages. There's a journal that I've published in before that says if your journal article once printed in the journal is 7 pages or less, it will be free under the subscription model. But for every page that it is longer than that, page 8, 9, or 10, 3 extra pages, you have to pay $150 for each of those. So again, this encourages you to be brief in how you state things, right? So that does that help provide you any context?
Yeah, it does. Thank you very much.
Okay. Anybody else? Questions?
Also, if you don't mind answering this, like some of them also talk about providing an assistance for that publication fee. They waive under certain
Yes.
conditions. And um, my personal experience, I submitted a paper a couple of months ago,
Yep.
and I applied for that assistance as well. But they denied
Yeah.
that. So I don't know what they look into while deciding whether they are providing that assistance or not. And
Yeah.
as a submitter, can I ask them why they denied that providing that assistance? And
Um,
also like, uh, do we get any kind of support from ORGS or anywhere while we have to pay that kind of publications fee here at CMU?
That's a great question. So let me start kind of in reverse order there from where you were discussing. You made the request and it was denied. I just submitted a paper this week, and we made that same kind of request. There are 10 authors on the paper, and of those 10 authors, most of the others come from developing countries around the world. And we have some grant funding, but those grant funds explicitly stated in the guidelines that the funds cannot be used to pay for publication costs, right? So with those kinds of restrictions, a publishing house will often look at where are the authors who are submitting the paper from. If they a lot of them are from developing countries and they know that in those developing countries, universities do not have the resources to enable them to pay these types of fees, they will give greater consideration in those cases to waiving the fee, and they have the ability to do that. Um, I don't think there's a problem, with you reaching out and asking, do you mind telling us why you denied? I would just be very courteous about it. I mean, they're not going to change their mind, but you could certainly, ask about that and just see if it's possible. Um, I think the other thing that they're looking at is, who are the authors on the paper? If you have four people publishing a paper who are all members of the National Academy of Sciences or Nobel Peace Prize winners, and they're requesting a waiver of the publishing charge, they're going to say, wait a minute, these are the giants in the field. They've got resources. Why are they asking for, a waiver of these fees? Okay. So that's something to consider as well. And then to the last part of your question, are there resources that are available on campus? Oftentimes, faculty members will come through the FRCE committee, the Faculty Research and Creative Endeavors Fund, and we do have some funds there that are available for not for open access fees per se, but are available to help support publication charges associated with page fees or things like that. And oftentimes in that committee, what we talk about is if there are five authors on the paper, but only one of the authors is from CMU and the four other authors are from other institutions, we feel like CMU's commitment should be commensurate with our level of authorship. So only 20%, right? And that means that on our campus, whether that is from the faculty members' resources themselves, from a grant that they've written, from departmental resources, college resources, FRCE, ORGS. I mean, there's different things that we can do on campus to help in certain instances. I don't mean that as a blanket statement either. I can't afford and I don't have funds to support every person with every paper out there. In unique instances, when there's a certain circumstance that comes up, can I provide a little assistance? Yes, I've been able to do that here and there, but it's limited. It's quite limited. So wherever possible, what I would encourage you to do is build these publication fees and costs into grants that you are writing. That is the best place that you can go to make sure that you have the funds available to ensure that we can pay these fees. And then beyond that, talk early on and candidly with all the authors on the paper about splitting the costs of those publications once it is accepted, such that the publication costs are shared in a proportional manner amongst the authors.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're kindly welcome. Dr. Swanson, did you have something you wanted to pop on and contribute? If he did or not. Okay. Anybody else have any other questions? Okay, well, I know we're a little bit past 1 o'clock, but I appreciate you all joining today. I hope you've enjoyed this information. If you would like a copy of this presentation or you have some follow-up questions, feel free to email me or stop by the office here. I'm always happy to talk to graduate students and postdocs and faculty. I'm always wanting to be here as a resource for you all. I encourage you very strongly in your academic pursuits and really enjoy seeing your scholarly publications and your creative activities as well, and all of the wonderful activity that we have going on at CMU. It's really inspiring and it's amazing to think about all those things going into the weekend. So hope everyone has a great weekend. Stay warm, enjoy the sunshine tomorrow, and until next time, have a great day. Fire up.